Right, exciting times in the household. We've got delivery of the gazebo.
This is massive.
You're massive.
Oh no.
Oh, I don't get the cameras on.
Oh no.
Right, so plan today is to get started on a new box, and I also think that my plow plane is coming today as well. I got a dispatch notification from Workshop Heaven where I've just ordered a new one from, so I'm hoping that that's going to come today, and then I can actually finish off the box that I started making in the last episode as well. But today I do want to get started on a new one because I want to test out if all the designs are actually possible.
Actually, no, I reckon we'll try this one with the little pull-out tab at the front, because that's different to what we did before. The other one that we did in the last episode was like a lift-off lid, so let's give this one a go. So for this box, I have opted for brown oak for the ends, sycamore for the front and back, and then holly for the lid, like really nice and gnarly. I'm hoping it's going to stay flat in the, you know, it's really gnarly, really. So yeah, I'm hoping it's not going to bow over time, but we will see. First job is to get the front and backs sized. So I'm halfway through dimensioning this bit of brown oak for the ends of the box, which is proving to be quite difficult. But fortunately I've got a little distraction halfway through doing so, and that is the delivery of my new Quancheng or Luban plow plane. I think Luban is like one of the models of Quancheng or something like that, but either way, a lot of people ask me about the difference between something like this and, let's say, a Lie-Nielsen and Veritas equivalent, and I thought this would be a good opportunity to quickly go through that. Now, I don't have a Lie-Nielsen or Veritas plow plane or anything like that, but it doesn't really matter because functionally, if you were to get a Lie-Nielsen plow plane and put it up against a Quancheng plow plane or Veritas up against this, functionally they are exactly the same. You'll get exactly the same results from this that you will the Lie-Nielsen or the Veritas, providing you set them up correctly, of course, like sharp blade, fine cut, and you'll get exactly the same results. The difference with Quancheng and those higher level tiers of tools is in my opinion, the overall finish and maybe machining of the tools. So for example, the first thing that stuck out to me here was the end grain on this wooden fence. It's a little bit rough and could be a little bit nicer finish. Now, if you bought a Lie-Nielsen or a Veritas and it came with a wooden fence, it would very likely be finished beautifully, but because this is sort of the tier down, that finish, not as much care has gone into it. The knurling on some of the knobs on the Quanshengs can be a little bit hit and miss sometimes. On this one, it's actually pretty good from what I've seen with Quansheng planes in the past, but if you compare that to a Lie-Nielsen, minus all the rubbish that's on this, the knurling and the overall adjustment of that mechanism is beautiful, and sometimes on the Veritas ones, it can be a little bit clunky compared to this, but it doesn't matter. And if you look in here, there's a little bit of wear or chipping or something like that, and also these screws here look like they might be made of a sort of softer material that's likely to be rounded over after sort of being inserted and removed a couple of times. I might be completely wrong on that, but just looking at them, it looks like they might be that type of screw, if you get what I mean. But like, that's pretty much it. It is just cosmetic differences in the two tiers of tools. With the Lie-Nielsen and Veritas, everything is going to be finished absolutely beautifully, and there shouldn't be any errors in the finish at all, and if there is, then of course you can return it. But that's the only trade-off with the Quansheng. Functionally, they work exactly the same, and Quansheng's kind of the same tier as like Wood River and stuff like that as well. It's just cosmetic differences. You can pretty much be guaranteed that the adjustments will work really nicely, the bottom will be flat, and the blade is of a good quality as well. From memory, I think these blades are 01 steel, which is slightly softer than what you would get in a Lie-Nielsen where they do A2 blades. And Veritas usually use A2 or their own PMV11, both of which are harder than 01, but 01 being a softer steel means it's less brittle, meaning that you can, in theory, get a sharper edge on it. So yeah, there's pros and cons to it all. So I guess what I'm saying is, if you're working with a cheap plane and you can't quite stretch to the Lie-Nielsen and Veritas and stuff like that, but you're incredibly annoyed and want to upgrade, then don't discount the middle tier, because functionally it is exactly the same as one of these, it's just not as nicely finished. Anyway, sidetrack over. Let's get this thing sharp again. And on the subject of cheap tools, another thing I'm often asked is, what's the best sharpening setup for a budget? And for me personally, I haven't come across anything better than this, which is the Axminster Rider sharpening station, double-sided diamond stone this side, 1000, and then 400 on the other side for some like rough grinding stuff, leather strop, paste, and a sharpening base, which is cool. It's definitely not needed, but these two paired together are really good, and you can get a very sharp blade from this. It's blooming awesome. It's amazing what a sharp blade can do. That is just pure fragile end grain. So now, with both ends square to the face edge, I'm going to mark the distance in to get the length of the sides, cut them off, and then plane those down to length, and we have our two ends. That is silly. It's not major, but it's a little bit annoying because the box is going to end up a little bit smaller than I'd hoped. What I did was I cut the front and back to their final dimensions, forgetting to take into account that these edges are going to be bowing out beyond the edge of the box. What I wanted to do was cut the front and back to the overall length of the box and then shape the end of the dovetail as well as the side all in one. Whereas because I've cut it too short, I'm going to have to nest them in like this, cut the standard through dovetail, and then shape it from there. So it's just a little bit squished in than what I'd hoped. There is a way around this, in that I could cut this dovetail as a lapsed dovetail and then shape it instead. But instead of faffing around with trying to cut that joint out, I'm just going to carry on with it as a through dovetail and then make that box a little bit shorter, and I'll just take this lesson on the chin for the future boxes where we use this design. So we're all pretty much familiar with the process of dovetailing by this point. If you're not, then go and have a look at my free online woodworking school. Links in the description. Right, brainwave, just had a new plan and it's going to look pretty disgusting, but it's going to work. So what we're going to do is cut our dovetails out of the sycamore as I originally decided. So this is the full width of the sides and this is actually the length that we're going to cut them to, give or take. The problem with that would be, because these sides are so thick, I would have to cut these out as lapsed dovetails. So I'd have to like chisel down here, clean out inside that socket, and then just cut off this entire area to shape it back from there. But then it occurred to me, what if I don't bother cutting lap dovetails? I just lay them on top of this thicker material and instead just cut them all the way as through dovetails, like that. So then all of this is just a big old socket, but the dovetail only goes in like probably about halfway. And then when this is shaped away afterwards, it won't matter. I don't know if that makes any sense whatsoever, but when I'm making this, you will see what I mean, and fingers crossed it works. Because if it doesn't, then that's going to be one day down the drain. There we go. Uno box of Uno. So, hopefully you can see what I'm kind of going for with this now. You can see we've got all that exposed end grain pin area there, and that is going to be what's shaped away using some sort of radius template that I haven't found yet. We're just going to test some things and see what matches. The first thing I'm looking at is the weights in the shed, but I'm not sure I fancy handling those. I'll tell you what, that could be pretty good. If not, the pot down there, where is it? There, of fence varnish. Or a lampshade. That could also work. Let's give this a try. Too steep. Okay, so that's curving back way beyond the tails. So we need something wider. Quite scared about taking the lid off that. Let's try a lampshade. Good thing about this, we have two different radiuses on it. So, nice. Or, I'll tell you what, what's this one like? No, that's too shallow. This is actually pretty damn good. In fact, I'm actually going to need to shift this back a little bit further so that I don't get any square end grain visible on here. So that means that the actual point I need is going to be 7mm in from there. Right, so it looks like the curves are going to work out on either of the ends, which I'm very happy about. The next job is to start plow planing the groove for the bottom panel of the boxes, and you know, that was plural. We're going to do it for both of them, the one that we did in the last episode and the one that we've done in this one. The challenge we have here is if I was to cut a groove on the inside of this box and do it as a through groove so that it shows on the end of the tails, then you know, that problem's kind of self-explanatory. We're going to have a groove that's showing on the end of the tails, which we don't want. So in the case of this box that I've been doing today, what we're going to do is create a stopped groove that stops probably about halfway within the tail there and doesn't blow through from the other side. And the nice thing about this design is that I've got some really thick ends on it that I can groove into, so I can maybe make this one about 6 to 8 millimeters deep and really get a lot of the material in there. As for these sides, it's going to be challenging creating a stopped groove, but because I've got so much area here I can dig into, these ones probably only need to be about 1 millimeter or 2 depth, which is awesome. This one that we did yesterday, however, is going to be a little bit more challenging because although I have the luxury of nice thick sides, the fact they're at an angle doesn't make it very easy to use a plow plane and get a groove that's in line with the rest of the box, if that makes any sense. So the one on here is probably going to need to be hand shaped as well, which I'm not really looking forward to. As for these ones, it is slightly thicker material, so I can afford to make the groove a bit deeper, but I'm just going to have a go at this and see what happens. The other option is to set the plow plane up to cut in this area here, just below the tail, so that if I was to go all the way through, it doesn't show through on this end grain and the groove is concealed by this pin coming up. The only issue then is when the groove is cut in the pin board here, then there's the chance for it to appear through this end grain instead. I can't work out which one is going to be better, or should I say easier for that matter. I think I'm going to do the latter option, where I do the plow plane just below the tail here, so we actually do a through groove on the front and back components. And then these ones on the side, because there's not a whole lot of length that I need to cut a groove in, I might just do it by hand with a chisel. I think with a marking gauge, or in fact even this mortise gauge set up so I can scribe both the top and the bottom lines at once, I reckon I could get that groove pretty good by hand. So I've got some of this beech veneered plywood, which is pretty nice, and it actually is, I'd say it's pretty much ready sanded. Might need some 240 grit going over it, but it's actually a very nice finish. So I'm going to be using this for the bottom of the box, and I'm hoping that this plow plane that I got delivered today has a blade that is the same thickness as this board. Okay, that's good. I've got a 1/8 and I've got a 3 millimeters. 1/8 is 3.2 millimeters. 3 millimeters is 3 millimeters. It's not quite right. Okay, it's going to be a bit on the tight side. Right, we're going to go for the 3.2 millimeters and just do some jiggery to get the bottom panel fitted. Just need to give this blade a little bit of a sharpen. Right, let's have a look at this. I've never actually owned a plow plane before, which you can probably expect seeing as I've just bought one for this episode. I've just had a play around with them in the past with like old record plow planes and stuff like that, and they're pretty fun to use. They're very similar to rebate planes, but this is definitely the fanciest one I've used. So as long as this blade doesn't hit the top of the tail here when I adjust the fence, then that will be absolutely fine. I'm going to check this on each tail independently as well, just in case there's any variation of that distance from the top of the tail to the edge of the material. So what I'm liking about this plane is it's very intuitive to use. Like this, there isn't any sort of gripping surface here that encourages you to do this. Instead, it encourages you to just have your palm flat on it and let the plane do the work and not induce any tilt or anything from your arms, which is really cool. It just helps keep it square and straight. So I'm going to start at the end, do some short shavings, get that track established, and then just gradually elongate them. It's working rather lovely. Tell you what, thoroughly impressed by that. I'll see what the final verdict is at the end of this video, but first impressions, would highly recommend. So this is going to be the challenging bit. Fitting the wrong tail into the wrong socket apparently. Wait a minute. Oh, blimmin' hell. What am I doing here? Oh, that's why. Put it through from the wrong side. There we go. Right, so my original plan was to set the marking gauge up like this to match both sides of that groove and then transfer it up the sides of here so that I can be sure they're in line. However, we do have a little step here on the bottom of each of the sockets where they didn't align perfectly, which is pretty normal with dovetails. It happens from time to time, but if I was to reference this off the bottom of here, then those lines are not going to be in line with one another. So what I'm going to do on each corner individually, I'm going to get my knife and then just put a little mark where that groove is intersecting with this component, and then after I've done that on each corner, I'll just be able to get the component upright like that and then join those lines up with a ruler and the knife, and then we'll start chopping it out by hand. Right, so I've managed to cut a groove into the ends of this box, into the brown oak, and do you know what? It looks all right. It's not too bad. The challenging one now, as I said earlier, is going to be this one with the angled edges, because I can't exactly get the plough plane resting on this material and cut the groove to be in line with this one, because it's going to tilt in order to match this, and then the groove is going to be at an angle, which obviously we don't want. So what I've been toying around in my brain with is actually cutting a 90-degree corner in the end of this to give the base some support from underneath. And the way this is going to work, I'm going to try and draw it, but it's quite challenging. So if this is the front of the box, sort of coming in like that, and then that's going into the angled side like that, and then that would be the inside wall of the tilted edge. We've got a groove coming in from this way like this, and what I'm thinking of doing is simply cutting a 90-degree corner into the angle component like that. So it's not in a groove or anything like that, it's just simply, what I'm thinking about doing is getting a chisel in there and just, so it's pretty simple, but as you can see, what that's going to do is give this base some support from underneath. And in all honesty, if this join here ends up looking a little bit ropey, then I'll just put felt on the inside and no one will be the wiser. And this technique I used before, where I disassembled the box and marked where the groove was on the ends independently before actually cutting the grooves on the end, worked very, very well. So I'm going to try the same on the ends of these. I'm going to mark where that groove is intersecting with the end component on each individual joint, and then join those markings up across the ends and attempt to cut them out. So I've cut the 90-degree notches out the end of the box, and I did manage to split off a small part of the bottom of the end. It was a pre-existing split. It was there when I machined up the timber and was already a bit loose, and apparently whacking into it with a chisel is all it needed to split off. But I think with a bit of clamps, a bit of glue, that should close up just nicely, and it's the bottom of the box, so I'm not too worried about it. It was just a little bit scary when it happened. So final job today is to sand all the inside faces and get the first layer of finish on, ready to be glued tomorrow. So to pre-finish these, I am going to do one coat of quick drying tung oil on the inside, and then tomorrow I'm going to do a coat of microcrystalline wax over that, and that will be all it needs for the inside. One coat of oil and one coat of wax. As for the outside, I'll probably do 2 coats of oil, 1 coat of wax, something like that, or I might go, you know, I might get a different finish or something like that, but for the time being, that is the plan. Right, there we go. We're going to call that for this episode. The insides are all pre-finished, and hopefully in the next episode we're going to get the bases fitted and get the rest of the box glued around it. So as always guys, thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please don't forget to press the like button below and subscribe if you haven't already. I'll see you in the next one.